Well, hello, hey everybody. Good afternoon, good morning. Welcome. Thanks for joining us for this webinar. My name is Brad Carlin. I'm a senior consultant with TRG Arts. I'm based in the UK, but I work with clients across the UK and North America. And my Pride and Prejudice bestie, my co-pilot, my ride or die with me on this webinar is my man, Stephen Skripik. Say hello, Stephen.
Your very own Darcy, Brad. It's lovely to be here. I thought this was a webinar for your fan club, but you fooled me into it. Hi, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's a little bait and switch, I think, to get, 120 plus people watching at the moment thinking this is going to be a deep dive into Jane Austen, when really it's going to be a deep dive into pricing and inflation. But we can have fun with both. That's what I think. That's what we can definitely have fun with both of those. So we're glad you're here. And again, thanks everyone. Just some quick housekeeping. You will get a copy of the deck after this, so don't worry. We're going to share all of this fun stuff with you afterwards. Please feel free to use the chat and the Q&A freely. If you raise your hand, we may ask you to put your question into chat or into the Q&A if you can. Stephen's going to help me keep an eye on that. At the moment, it isn't set up for us to use or communicate with each other through video or audio. We'll see how it goes, but generally, I think given the number of people in the room and how we're going to really try to honor your time this morning and this afternoon, we will we'll stick to the chat and the Q&A. All right. And with that, I think we'll get the housekeeping out of the way. We're going to let other people join us as they can. So yes, thank you. Of Price and Progress, and tip of the hat to my colleague Grant for the clever title. We are going to dive into inflation and other impacts that our sector has been working through as part of our recovery on this side of the COVID valley that we have been through, that we're climbing our way out of. We'll be looking at data together that covers both North America and the UK. There's some similarities, there's some differences. We're going to speak in very, very broad terms, as with any conversation about inflation. It's a very macroeconomic topic, right? So while your results may vary in your particular neighborhood, in your neck of the woods, a lot of what we're going to talk about is kind of sector-wide insight that we're seeing, but there are moments where we can really drill down to understand what does it mean to you and your organization? How are you reacting and responding? And what might be some actions you can take, hopefully, coming out of our conversation today. Okay, the data we're going to look at today is from our Arts and Culture benchmark. There's about 400 plus organizations that we are receiving data from every single day, all shapes, sizes, geographies, disciplines, genres, in both of these regions of the world, and that's what's going to drive a lot of the data that we are looking at today. This is some of this data set includes TRG clients, those who are working with us in a consulting relationship. Many are not. And so there's a balance in here between organizations that are just participating in this benchmark, which we started right as the worst of COVID was taking off, to provide data to the governments of the UK, Canada, and the United States. Since then, we've shifted the focus of this benchmark to be on how we are helping organizations and understand what the recovery is looking like within our sector. But this is the data source that we are using. We will also be looking at data that is primarily comparisons between 2019 and 2023. And the reason for that is because all of these 400 organizations have different seasons and different fiscal years and different cycles to their sales and contributions. We are choosing to look at this and comparing data just to kind of normalize it across a calendar year. And so when we can look at an entire calendar year, we can capture most of the business cycles of all different types of organizations, and we can kind of standardize the timings. So some of this may not align with your own individual calendars and cycles that you've seen within your organization, but it also allows us to make sure that we're not over or under representing data if we're only looking at data from, say, the first 6 months of the year. So while we get data every single day, for the purposes of these big, massive analytics projects, we tend to focus just on a full year at a time. There's a couple little tidbits that we've thrown in there that are slightly inside and outside of that, just to keep it interesting. Okay, Brad, enough of the blah, blah, blah. We're here for charts and graphs. We came to a free webinar from TRG to see pretty numbers and pretty charts. So we're going to get right to it. Let's start and orient ourselves around what we're seeing in the UK benchmark. This is 2019 to 2023. This is organizations just in the UK benchmark. We're looking at total tickets in the bar graph there, corresponding to the axis on the left, and revenue, total revenue, big numbers on the right. And this kind of check mark shape is what we're seeing everywhere. We're going to see this in other sectors. We're seeing this when we drill down into individual genres and cohorts and disciplines. It's what we see when we look at this data in individual regions across the United States, that basically it's some variation on this kind of check mark shape, obviously a big dip in 2020, and then incrementally building our way back up. At first glance, you can look at these figures here and see that between 2019 and 2023, we've had a reasonable increase in the number of units and a pretty significant increase in the amount of revenue, right? We look at this and go, wow, we're back, baby, here we are, and we're ready. But there's lots of questions underneath what we're seeing in this data, and that's really what's at the crux of today's conversation. Drilling down a little bit deeper. So this is top line units and revenue. Let's understand what's happening within certain types of behavior of bookers within this time, of households within this time. So we've noticed that frequency is down 4%. That is the number of events on average that people are attending within a year has declined 4% from 2019 to 2023 in the UK. The yield, similar to average ticket price, but because we're looking at really big massive amounts of data where there's not a lot of splitting out between paid tickets and free tickets and discount tickets, we're calculating yield here by just taking the total amount of money that's coming through the benchmark and dividing it by the tickets that are being issued. Gets us close to something like an average ticket price, but it won't actually look like an average ticket price paid or an average ticket price of a ticket. But what we can see is that the yield is up. So the amount of money that we're generating based on the number of tickets that we're distributing is up 10% in the UK over this time. This I thought is really interesting. We're actually seeing a slight increase in the number of tickets per booker. People are buying more tickets, and even when we take group bookings out of that data. So that's what that 1% increase is showing you, that people on average are buying a few more tickets on their visit, especially when we're taking the big group bookings, which can really swing those numbers quite considerably. So that's an encouraging sign. So they're paying a little bit more and they're buying a few more tickets. They're just not coming as frequently. But overall, customers are down, but they're only down about 1%. This number has been growing back over the time period of 2019 to 2023. So basically, we've got fewer people coming less frequently, but when they're coming, they're buying a few more tickets and they're paying a little bit more money. And so that's what's helping us drive these kinds of changes that we are seeing. All of this put together is what is fueling that check mark that we're seeing in the UK. Same view, but in North America. We are now same time period. You'll see a very similar check mark, right? We've got tickets on the left. We've got revenue on the right. This would be organizations across the United States and Canada, and a very similar shape and behavior. Top line top line comparisons here, 4% increase in units and a similar 31% increase in revenue. Again, you look at 2019 compared to 2023, and you might, if you were just looking at this chart, if you weren't living it in the trenches, as most of you are every single day, you may look at this and go, hey, that's pretty good. Revenue's up 31%. We're starting to sell more tickets than we did before COVID. But as we'll allude to in a moment, that may not be how it feels to us every single day. Unpacking this data a little bit more, in North America, frequency is down much, much more in North America. Frequency is down 12%. Now, you'll know, those of you in North America will know, you rely more heavily upon the subscription model and a reliance upon larger packages and that subscriber relationship that we have with many of our customers that isn't quite as common in the United Kingdom. And we have seen big changes in subscription throughout this period of time. And so naturally, when we lose one subscriber who may be engaging 5, 6, 7, 8 times a year, that really pulls down that average frequency a lot relative to that individual customer who we may have lost or whose behavior has changed. The yield here is up way more, right? So we're seeing that in North America, you've done a much better job at keeping pace with inflation. We'll dig deeper into inflation, but the yield that we're seeing on tickets in North America is up 25% in 2023 to 2019, really driving that increased revenue in spite of modestly increased units. Average tickets per booker is also up, especially when we're taking out massive group bookings as well. Another encouraging sign that people are paying more, they're buying more tickets, they're just not attending as frequently on average, but a lot of that behavior has to do with changes that we've seen in subscription. We've got 2% fewer customers. So we're doing all of this. We're generating 31% more revenue and just 4% more ticket sales in 2023 than in 2019. But we're doing it on 2% fewer customers than we had back in 2019. So there's a balance there. We've kind of just got back. We're having to work harder on fewer people in order to generate this kind of revenue and these kinds of units. So when we saw this data and we look at this and we look at this across the regions, and the story is not wildly different when thinking about different regions or different countries within North America. It's the same basic shape and the same basic kind of underlying principles that are impacting that level of demand and the recovery in North America and in the UK. We look at those, and at first you glance and we say, wow, revenues are up 30%. We've recovered our unit growth. We're selling more tickets than we did in 2019. But we have this record scratch moment is what I've described it as, because I know when Stephen and I are engaging and working with clients every day, they're not feeling that sense of optimism that we might get when we just look at those charts, when we just look at that comparison between revenue and units. It doesn't feel like that. And so if we were to ask you those of you who are working in the sector in pre-COVID times and the before times, how that feels now and how that felt then is still really different, is what we're noticing and what we're feeling, in spite of the numbers suggesting that we might be in as good a place on the surface as we were back then. And that's what really led us to kind of try to understand this question. I'm going to stick with the record and analogy a little bit longer, right? To really ask this question, how does it feel? And it doesn't feel great. That's the short answer. The numbers say we should feel better about where we are in aggregate, but the vibes aren't there. And so we were really trying to understand this, and it led us down the path of really trying to understand the impact of inflation, cost of living, and big shifts in behavior around government subsidy in the UK, for example, and big swings in individual giving in the North American market. And so we'll dive into a bit more of those two areas now. And so forgive me, I'm going to nerd out on this for just a little bit, and then I promise we'll move on to stuff that's more kind of day to day in terms of what we work in every day. Okay. Let me walk you through this chart where we've tried to distill really complex factors here, and to aggregate and to synthesize these in as simple and clear ways as we could think to. We're looking at the UK market at the moment, and the UK market is much more reliant upon government subsidy than the North American market. They are less reliant upon individual philanthropy in the UK. And so we'll look at North America in a different way. But for now, for most UK organizations, the vast majority of their revenues every year come from two places. It's coming from some form of ticket sales, and it's coming from government subsidy. That covers, by and large, anywhere from 60 to 70% of the revenue for some organizations from one of those two sources. So we're talking about massive proportion of a business's operating revenues coming from those two places. And what we wanted to understand was, how have changes in those two really important sources of revenue evolved through COVID and into our recovery, and how has that aligned with what we are knowing and feeling and experiencing every day in terms of the impact of inflation and cost of living in the UK and in North America. So this chart is inflation adjusted changes. So it's been indexed based on 2019 as our benchmark, as our kind of starting point. So all of this is in reference to looking back to 2019 values. And what we've seen, so that's why 2019 on the chart, we start at zero. And let's start with the government line, which is the line in green, so that you can see in 2020, government spending surged. Again, adjusted for inflation, all based on 2019 values of currency. Huge surge in government spending in 2020, as we're also seeing huge declines in the light green figure there for ticket revenue. The number in the middle, we're calling core revenue index. And that is a number that is a weighted combination of ticket revenues and government subsidy. It's kind of it's the aggregate of those two things to think about how, so one is going up, but one is going down. We've got inflation working in there as well. What is the kind of aggregate effect of all of that revenue if you were to just look at the bottom line of the organization? In 2020, what this would suggest is though government spending was way up, ticket revenue way down, our core revenue was still down by about a third. Right. And so we had organizations closed in the UK. We were on lockdown. You had furloughs. You had, other kind of social safety net projects coming into place to support people during this time. But in general, revenues were still down, even though government money was up and ticket revenue was down. As we move through 2021, government investment stays about the same. It does start coming down. Some organizations start reopening. We're starting to sell tickets again. We're starting to have events. You start to see that ticket revenue start to grow. By 2022, government funding in the UK is on a major decline. They're starting to really pull out their investments that were made during COVID. But we're seeing ticket revenues increase, and we're nearly getting back to that equilibrium point in 2022, where we've got this balance between our government subsidies and our inflation-adjusted ticket revenues. By 2023, we're starting to see ticket revenues move into the positive. Even adjusted for inflation, but only up 4%. But now government subsidies have fallen below the point at which, both from a value and from an inflation-adjusted figure, down 13%, pulling that core revenue index down to -2. So all those words and all that number is basically trying to put some data behind a feeling. It's about putting that data behind the feeling of why doesn't it feel like we are in as good a place as it might suggest when we looked at those charts before. What this data shows us is that the core revenue index means we're still 2% behind when adjusted for inflation. The revenues that we would have had, just revenues that we would have had based on 2019. We're barely getting back to where we were in 2019. Meanwhile, we've had, really big changes happening in our staffs. We've had really big changes happening on the expense side of the ledger. That clash between what we're seeing and having to generate so much more revenue on fewer people is what's putting a lot of pressure on our teams. Okay, let's look at the same data, but slightly different point of view, but in North America. So instead of government subsidy here, we're looking at PGR. We're calling this patron-generated revenue. So this is looking at all ticket revenue, single tickets, group tickets, subscribers, all of that is in that tickets index. And then the donation revenue in the purple. And then just like that core revenue index we were referring to in the UK chart, the PGR index, that patron-generated revenue. So really thinking about this is money coming directly from individuals. This is also the vast majority of most of the revenue for most North American arts and cultural organizations coming from these two sources. And we see a pretty similar story, right? We actually see the government funding didn't really start to impact the sector in North America until 2021, even though tickets fell much further in 2020. That works its way up in 2022. We're getting real close to an equilibrium point, but we're still not quite there. And by 2023, we're starting to see ticket revenue well above 2019 inflation-adjusted point values at 7%. Donations have continued to fall both in real terms and in terms, of course, it's kind of a double whammy when we're actually like the volume is down on donation revenue. And then, of course, that money is worth less today than it was in 2019. And so now we've got this drag on our organizational revenues, still putting North American organizations in aggregate in a place of feeling like we're still about 15% behind where we were in 2019. Tickets have done well. What's really interesting and a big difference between the UK and North American markets is that the North American market has done really well at actually keeping ticket prices and ticket revenue more or less in line with inflation, and now has actually been able to outpace it. But that good work in trying to balance ticket price inflation in North America has not been, we haven't had as much success on the donation side of the front. And so organizationally still feeling like we're in these really tough spots, really tight financial positions, as we've seen both in real terms and in the value terms of that donation revenue decline. So what about the people behind all of this? Where have we seen, again, keeping with my record theme, what is happening to our customers through all of this? So we're starting to get an understanding of how inflation is impacting our entire business. There's parts of it that feel like we should be feeling so much better than we are, but it's pulling us down. If tickets have been able to keep pace, government subsidy or donations are pulling us back. But we know we've got slightly fewer customers. They're coming less frequently. So what else is going on in their behavior that we need to understand that is different now from what we saw in 2019? So what we're looking at here is a really simple kind of recency segmentation that we run in the benchmark. And we have three simple segments. One is a new segment, right? Which is, as best as we can tell, these people are new to the database. They're attending for the first time, as best we can tell in the data that we've got. That active segment are people who have engaged at least once within the past 18 months. And the reactivated segment are people who, prior to their most recent transaction, had not engaged with the organization for 18 months or more. And so what we want to understand is the distribution both of the bookers, and we're looking here at just the kind of most recent couple of years after COVID. And then at the bottom, we're looking at what proportion of our ticket revenue are each of these different segments responsible for. So in the top charts there, you can see in North America, for example, new bookers in the past couple of years have been about 47% of our bookers, of our customers. And in the United Kingdom, they've been a little more than half of our customers since 2021. However, you can look at there's some disparities here in terms of who's driving revenue. In North America, we've got 43% active, but it's 47% of our revenue. We see new customers at 47% of our customers in North America, but only 43% of our revenue. So our active customers are by and large more valuable to us, driving more of our revenue in both North America and in the UK. Our reactivated customers, it's pretty balanced, right? 10% of our customers contributing 10% of our revenue. It's pretty different in the UK, where we are much more reliant upon those active customers. You can see that's a big swing to go from a third of our bookers, but more than half of our revenue. So how reliant are our bottom lines on those relationships that we have with our most current bookers? We have loads of new people coming in, but it's coming up with a less than a third of the actual revenue that we're bringing in, that we're utilizing to balance our books and to support our programming. There have been some changes in new customers in particular. I want to zoom in there for a minute in the two regions. So by comparison, in 2019, in the aggregate, in the benchmark data that we've got, new customers were only 40% of our customers in 2019 in North America. That's grown to 47%. So as a proportion, remember, we're still down on customers overall, but we've become more reliant upon new customers than we were pre-COVID. It's actually gone the other way. In the United Kingdom, we were much more reliant upon new customers in 2019. It's come down just a little bit. That number has been increasing if we were to look at this over time. So it's getting back to where it was in 2019. The other important trend line that isn't on here that you should know is that reactivated slice of the pie has been getting smaller, much smaller, and has moved very little in the past couple of years, and is basically back where it was in both regions in 2019. The important takeaway there is, I know for a couple of years, we were all really focused on getting people back. What can I do to get them back? I got to get them back. I think we've gotten back. What the data is suggesting to us is those who are going to come back, by and large, we have gotten them back. We are now working from very, very similar proportions of reactivated customers as we were in pre-COVID times. Those numbers were much bigger, in 2021 and in 2022 than they were in 23 and 24. The other behavior we want to understand is multi-buyers. And so multi-buyers, and we're going to break this out, we're going to put UK and North America on the same chart. I'm going to break it out in a couple of different ways. But again, I'm using this principle of like, let's compare ourselves to 2019. Let's anchor ourselves in that as our kind of benchmark moment in pre-COVID. And we are now looking at changes in the proportion of people who are engaging in 2 or more events in the same season. And what we've seen is really significant growth in the UK, particularly from 2021. We're up now 14% as a proportion of people engaging in more events than what we saw in 2019. We've got fewer customers, but they're engaging in more events, not as much overall as they were before when we had more customers engaging, quite frequently, which was the big reason why our frequency is down 4%. So think all the way back to that first chart on the UK, and we saw, well, frequency's down 4%, but you're telling me that we've got 14% more multi-bookers, and that's, just people looking at 2 or more. One of the biggest shifts that we've seen is the people who we have lost, the people whose behavior has changed the most, were the people who were engaging the most. So it was the people who were attending pre-COVID 4, 5, 6 times. Their behavior has changed the most compared to people who were only engaging 2, 3 times. And so what that means is they're more valuable and more impactful to us when we lose them, and they pull that frequency number down, even though as a proportion we've been growing the number of people who are engaging in multiple events. In North America, we've split this up into 2 different ways, and this multi-buyer data is subscribers and non-subscribers. We're not separating out, we're just looking at who's coming to multiple events. I don't care if you're coming as a subscriber or coming as a single ticket buyer. What we're interested in is what's happening in the breakdown between how many events are you attending. And what is really interesting is when we look at that average of 2 to 5 events, that's where we're down 3%. It's been really flat. It's come down since 2019. So those less frequent folks, smaller packages, less frequent multi-single ticket buyers, you're seeing that number just keep hovering a few ticks below where we were in 2019. Meanwhile, the proportions of people who are engaging in packages of 6 or more has really increased. And so this is where we are noticing differences in behavior. Now, these are proportions, not volume. And so there's not as many people engaging in 6+ as we saw before in volume, but in proportion terms, there's real growth there. So this notion of a kind of a loss of appetite for people to engage really deeply in North America in particular is interesting. This data is a little counterintuitive in that way, that actually what this is suggesting is we're maintaining pretty high levels of people who like to engage the most, but we're struggling with the folks who are engaging in the more moderate range of 2 to 5 times per year. This is special. This is slightly different subscription data. It's not actually related to the chart on the left. This is just for my North American homies for a very specific subscription package only data point that I know you will be thirsty for. Is making this comparison in North America between 18-19 and 23-24. So this is more recent data, and looking at just sheer package volume and sheer subscription package revenue. And you can see sub packages are still down about 20% on aggregate in the benchmark from 2019. Revenue only down 1%. Right. So again, we've done a good job in North America of continuing to maintain the value, keeping pace in North America with the value of that ticket. Even though we're down quite a bit on packages, we've been able to offset that. And our subscribers have been willing to pay considerably higher rates for subscription than they had in the past. This is also letting us know the people who we have held on to are higher value subscribers. They're the ones who have the higher average ticket price packages. They're the ones who have the larger packages in general. And so these are the folks who are helping to maintain that kind of like bottom line balance sheet revenue standpoint from subscription, even though as a sector, we're still really struggling just to get bums in seats and to get packages filled as a subscriber. Okay, next and maybe not bust a myth, I want to poke at a myth. One of the things, I know, Stephen, you probably hear this as much as I do, is People telling us in the client relationships that we're working in is that people are booking later. They're booking later. They're booking so much later than they did in pre-COVID times. And while I think that was true in especially in the immediate months and years coming out of COVID, this is becoming less true as we move into 2023 and into 2024. So this is everything, and we've seen this chart in both the UK and the North America. So I've just put it into one chart. It's not materially different in either region, so the behaviors are not actually different in these on either side of the pond. So in one chart here, what we're noticing is comparing how many weeks before the performance date on average are people booking in 2019, that's the green line, versus 2023. And you can see that again, in aggregate, your individual results may vary, of course. And while yes, there have been some instances of like real behavior change in certain types of product in certain places, but in aggregate, we're not quite seeing that. We're seeing a lot of the same behavior we saw before, which is still, unfortunately, relying upon about 2/3, 60% to 2/3 of our audiences booking within the last 30 weeks before they are attending. Now, we have a theory as to why it feels like maybe people are booking later. And part of this is related to our increased reliance, our increased proportions of newer customers. Newer customers are a bigger slice of our pie, especially in North America, than what we had seen before. We have lost our reliance upon subscription. We're having to backfill that by relying more on single tickets. Many of us have shifted our programming strategies to make sure we've got plenty of kind of blockbuster populist kind of fare that is helping us drive lots of new people back into our theaters that are really commercially viable pieces. All of this is relying upon new customers who have always booked in the last few weeks before they attend. And so while in volume, that isn't radically different than what we saw pre-COVID, in proportion, it feels really different. And so that's why we have this sense that while behavior may not actually be different, what we may be feeling it in different ways because we're noticing having slightly different cycles, sales pacing cycles that we're going through as we have an increased reliance on new customers. Just a theory, just a theory. But all these new customers, it's a blessing and a curse. There are two sides to this coin. They have always been a really important part of our business models. They have also been incredibly difficult for us to hang on to and to retain and to keep over time. And so what we saw in terms of attrition is, especially prior to COVID, what we were noticing that and this is in both regions as well, so not radically different here between North America and the UK. These particular numbers you're looking at are just referring to North America, but the UK numbers are in the same ballpark. New customers who engaged with arts and cultural organizations in 2017 to 2018, new customers, we lost 62 to 80% of them on average after 2 years. So we gave them 2017-18 is when they made their first appearance. We gave them all the way till right as COVID was starting. So we try to give new customers about 2 years to return before we count them as having attrited from the database. And in that period, we were losing about 60 to 70, 80% of those customers. Post-COVID. So now we're looking at new customers who joined us in 21-22, and we've given them a couple of years to return. We're now finding that so far 80 to 95% of those new customers did not re-engage. I'm gonna let that sink in. I'm gonna let that sink in for a little bit because it kind of stings. kind of hurts a little bit, right? We are working so hard to drive new audiences into our buildings, to drive and fuel our recovery. And we're doing so oftentimes with less money and less people and higher pressure on our organizations to do so. And yet they're slipping through our fingers at rates that are considerably higher than they were pre-COVID. This is ouch is right. Thank you, unknown user. I agree in the chat. Ouch is right. And so this is a big red flag to us, right? We're not sure why, right? Lots of questions here about why. We have a perspective and an orientation as to what could be done to what work could be done from a campaign level, what investments could be made within an organization. This is the work we have been doing for years. It has always been hard, difficult, but important work over time. And we are getting ourselves into a real pickle when it comes to needing these customers to stick around with us. If in North America, for example, we are going to refill our subscription pipelines in 2-3 years down the road, we need these new customers to come back and then to come more frequently and then become really good prospects for subscription. So that future rebuilding of subscription needs to start with how well we are doing at retaining these new customers. And unfortunately, many of us are still really struggling in this work. We continue to have a kind of revolving door in our sector. It's always been an issue in our sector. You've heard us, if you've been on any of these webinars before, you've heard us kind of beat the drum about we tend to over attract and under retain. We're actually really good at getting new people to come into our venues in general. We're quite crap at getting them to come back a second time. But that difference, that work, that contradiction is where there is so much important opportunity in store for our organizations. For us, doing that work and trying to drive this, trying to answer these questions around how our business models need to change as behaviors are changing, as macroeconomic forces are changing, as philanthropic behavior is changing, as government subsidies are changing. There's loads of things happening, external to our sector that we can't control. But in order for us to be sustainable, and in order for us to be able to advance through not just this particular difficult time that we're in, but to be ready for the next one, because this is the other thing that'll get some ouches. Like we ain't done with like really tough shocks coming to our system. We've been through them before. They're going to happen again. And so the way our particular point of view is the way organizations can be better prepared to be resilient and to navigate those choppy waters is down to RFMG. For us, it's about recency, frequency, monetary value, and growth, right? This isn't rocket science. This is kind of a loyalty equation for any business. But for us in arts and culture, we have a particular point of view around what RFMG means and how do we structure our campaigns, our strategies, our work around these 4 simple letters that are so easy to say and yet so much work to actually infuse into our day-to-day business. So what do I mean? When we're talking about recency, it's basically this, right? It's that very similar stat we saw before, right? Of that new buyers not returning, most new buyers not returning within a couple of years. When we look at frequency, this is generalized data we see in organizations across the board that 80% of ticket buyers only visit once a year. So what are we doing to just improve that recency gap? How do we get new buyers to come back a little, just getting them to stay a little more active? They just need to come once again within 2 years. If we can close that recency gap and move that number from 75% to 70%, we can start to really have it's a multiplier effect in terms of longer term potential revenues within the organization. From a frequency standpoint, we've got 80% coming once a year. What could we do to just get a few more of those people coming twice? Again, that multiplier effect, that filling a pipeline for future subscribers and for future donors. We all know this. My marketers in the room know it is much less expensive to retain a customer than it is to find a new one. So the monetary side of this equation is not just about the household value and the lifetime value of these customers, because of course it's about that, right? The more active I am, the more frequent I am, the more engaged I am, the more valuable financially I am to your organization. But on the flip side of that, it's about optimizing the resources, the limited resources that many of our organizations have to attract and retain those customers in the first place. So what could happen? How could we reposition our investments to be more retention focused than acquisition focused could actually have better impacts on the business, because it just costs so much less to maintain customers than it is to keep finding new ones in that revolving door analogy. And lastly, in growth. It's one thing for folks to just kind of maintain that engagement over time. It's great. It feels good. We have our loyal core of donors and our loyal core of subscribers and members who are with us every single year. But when we dig deeper, so few of them are actually increasing that investment over time. Even little steps along the way help you keep pace with things, with external realities like inflation. This growth figure is really important to be thinking about, even in small steps, not just in your ticket prices, but in your contributions, in your membership values. If your average gift size has been static for the past few years, that money is worth less today than it was in 2019. If your membership price, for my UK colleagues, is the same as what it was in 2020, that money is worth less today, even though we may still have a really loyal following. It just doesn't spend the way it used to. Our expenses certainly have gone up. It costs more to put shows on and to move people around in order to present touring work or to buy plywood or fabric. But this growth metric is really underappreciated in times of big inflationary moments that we've been through. And it oftentimes catches us unawares. We find ourselves a few years down the road being like, oh, yeah, we were afraid to raise ticket prices, and now we're way behind the inflation curve, and we've got a big gap to fill. And now that step to get to where we need to be is far too big to take all at once. And now we're finding ourselves trying to play catch up as opposed to trying to make those incremental adjustments as we go, hopefully keeping pace with what other things are costing in our customers' lives. Okay, so some headline stats and provocations for you to start to chew on and take away. So as a reminder, lower frequency overall is driving reduced ticket volumes. Primarily, subscription is a big driver in North America, but programming is playing a role here too. Ticket revenues have nearly recovered. We're still lagging behind inflation though, right? So even though on the balance sheet, on the numbers, right, we're up 20, 30% in ticket revenue compared to 2019, when we adjust that for inflation, we are just barely past that equilibrium point. So we're still lagging. Have we raised our prices enough? Higher frequency customers are being replaced by new and less active customers. It's taking more of them to replace the people that we lost, which means we're having to work on them, spend more time on them, spend more money on finding them to replace them. More relationships that we are having to manage. And how much are we just focusing on driving volume, and are we really investing what we need to invest to start thinking about the flip side of that, which is driving frequency? Also, the loss of high-frequency customers, North America, read that also as subscription, is constraining the pipeline for individual giving. Part of the challenges that we're seeing in individual giving is related to the constriction of the subscriber market. And they were our best prospects for future donors. And when there's just fewer of them around, it puts a real gap in the pipeline for our friends in development and the work that they're doing on the individual giving side. So have we siloed these? We know in many organizations, they're not even talking together very much less understanding are there targets that they need to be working on. How can marketing be delivering donor-ready, giving-ready prospects to people? And what are the numbers for that? How are we measuring that? How do we know how many people do we need in order to hit? Do we need to be kind of pre-qualifying as potential donors on the marketing sides of our businesses? And the other thing we know is your teams are under increased strain. You're needing to work harder. You've got to find and manage more relationships. You've got to do this often with more programming. We've seen significant increases in the UK. Programming is up 8% compared to 2019. We've got more shows on stage, fewer customers, so we've got more things we've got to market. Our marketing budgets haven't increased very much, and that money doesn't spend the way it used to, right? Oh boy, what a good time to be alive, isn't it? Right? These are real meaty, difficult challenges that we're working through. And so are your organizations equipped with the skills and the culture to be able to adapt to where we are? Some things that we're hearing, I wonder if this resonates for you, and I wonder if you might pop this into chat, just if you see something on this list that resonates with you. I know, Stephen, this is a good opportunity for you to add to this list if you would like. But this is what I know we're hearing, and my consulting colleagues are hearing in both markets. Selling shows just feels more difficult than it did before. Our marketing budgets are flat or declining. Our teams are smaller, less experienced. We've got new people coming into the sector, but we've lost a lot of experienced people in big changes in our marketing and sales teams. Customer service expectations and behavior have changed. It is tough dealing with people in a box office these days in ways that it just didn't feel like it was in the before times. Lots of burnout in the industry, absolutely. We can't be the only ones in our market to raise prices. This is a tough one. This is that kind of tragedy of the commons situation, right? Where we're like, we know we need to raise prices. We haven't kept pace with inflation, but if others in our market aren't doing it, are we possibly pricing ourselves out and making ourselves not competitive? There are feelings we've heard in organizations that it isn't ethical or moral to raise our prices. These are things we would push back on and help you work through. Oh yeah, subscription is dead again. The pushback here would just remind you, let's look at what's happening in terms of the increases in multi-buyers as proportions and starting to find people. And we're just needing to say the behavior hasn't changed to people who want to engage with our work with frequency. The desire to want to come to our artistic product multiple times a year, that hasn't changed. The thing that also hasn't changed are the mechanisms we have in place to facilitate that kind of relationship with that customer. We by and large remained very rigid to a very particular approach to subscription, which is just a tool to facilitate frequency. The desire for frequency has gone nowhere. Our tools haven't gone anywhere either, but our tools are the thing that needs to change. There's still plenty of desire for frequency. I hear this a lot too. We feel pressure to have full houses regardless of price or per capita revenue. Just fill it. Don't care. I don't care. Late in the sales cycle, just get people. I want to get as many people in there. And what that often leads to is late discounting, undervaluing our prices, especially when we're in demand, and pulling and eroding the good work that we're trying to do to rage average ticket prices. Yeah, I'm not surprised that every one of these resonates. These are real things. Like, we're hearing this in the sector. We know this is real. And so these are the challenges we need to start figuring out how we're going to address one by one within our organizations. So how do we do that? Where do we go? Where do we go next? From our point of view, the things to do are starting to really distill, right? Inflation is a big, daunting thing. Government subsidy we can't control. External factors impacting philanthropy we don't have a lot of control over, but we do have control over understanding the essential price and gift questions that are facing our organizations and identifying the metrics, the individual metrics that are going to help us, prevent the widening of our institutional revenue gaps. So, for example, where are ticket prices not keeping pace with your rising costs? Maybe it's not in every product or every venue or in even every part of your venue, but where could we drill down to find opportunities where we might need to incrementally bring our ticket prices back in line with the costs of running our business? We'd ask you to really evaluate, is it emotion or data that's driving your pricing strategy? Where could you make incremental adjustments rather than ripping the Band-Aid off all at once? And how do your prices really compare, not just to your competition, but to your alternatives, to the other things that people are spending their disposable income on? In addition to price, what changes in your audience behaviors do you need to focus on to close revenue gaps? We talked a lot about frequency and retention of new to file customers and recency. And the value in trying to move people incrementally through RFMG. So where could you focus in your business, for example, to just try to build some frequency so that you could reduce cost of sale and make your marketing budget go further? If you focus more on retention, your marketing budget will stretch further. We know there's pressure coming on resources. Nobody's going to all of a sudden wake up and have, a 50% more marketing budget. We've got to figure out ways to stretch further. And if we can make that budget work for us better for retention, it can help stretch those marketing dollars and pounds. How are you working to overcome increasing churn rates of your new customers in particular, that scary 80 to 90% figure we saw? How are you evolving your subscription or multi-buy offer to meet the moment, right? The desire to engage more frequently has not changed. It is our mechanisms that need to change. Where can you implement strategies to raise average gift size? So thinking about that growth figure, that fewer than 10% growing over their donation gift over a period of 5 years. Are you working strategically for upgrades as opposed to just increases, right? Where are we thinking really particularly about lifting donors and members up to a whole new level as opposed to just asking for a few dollars more or a few pounds more? Are you building giving ready and donor ready pipelines, or are you just asking everybody all the time when it comes time to raise money? There's a difference between somebody who's ready to just give a gift to your organization and someone who is ready to become a donor, who is emotionally invested and is going to be with you in the long haul. What do you do to qualify them? How do you identify them? Where are you focusing on the pipeline that is going to deliver that high value philanthropy or high value membership down the road? For my friends in the UK, does your UK membership scheme take people on a journey from transactional to a philanthropic relationship, or does it just kind of stop at transactional and then there isn't a clear place for them to go who would like to go on that journey with us? For those of you who maybe have a philanthropic side to that journey, what does that bridge look like? How easy is it to move people from one end of the shore to another? And are you telling the story of what's happening in your organizations and how you're responding? Or are we just kind of quietly grinning and bearing it and not actually, communicating openly and with the people who care about us in our organizations? They are business people. They are living and breathing in the same world that we are. To kind of pretend that we aren't impacted by this stuff is a little disingenuous. How are we communicating to our patrons about the importance of them growing and changing with us in the times that we're in? Or are we just hoping that a few angel investors or a few blockbusters are going to pull us out of the doldrums? Okay, what can you do? Tagore is a Bengali poet and philosopher. I love this. You can't cross the sea by merely standing and staring at the water. And so for you all on the call today, what we're asking you to think about, you're in different positions, you're in different roles within your organization, and we believe firmly in trying to lead from where you are. Not everyone on this call is going to be the chief exec of an organization who can drive change in the areas that we've discussed here today from the top down. Many of you are going to have to find ways to lead from where you are, and an approach to take with that is something just called that 15% solution. What could I do just enough, just to start moving it in the right directions, right? These are small actions that anyone can do immediately, any role, any position, to be thinking about where do you have the autonomy to make some decisions? Where do you have discretion and freedom to act, not just to complain, not just to hypothesize about, well, I think this is because of that, or this is because of that decision, or this is because of that programming thing, right? What can we do to act? Where can we develop new pathways for increasing and upgrading donors? Where do we think about the structures or the invitations in our membership scheme? Where do we start to experiment or test with changes in our pricing to meet demand and to close the gaps with inflation? The reason we focus on 15% is because there is always, I know we always feel stretched and pressured, and we never have enough time in the day. But what we tend to find, and we do resource audits with organizations, and we really dig down into understanding how much time do they have and where do they have unused capacity and resource. And we always find that there is always some extra capacity and resource within a team. We think 15% there is for the taking. You just have to find it and take it, quite literally take it. Make it routine to ask for these solutions in meetings, to bring it up with leaders and partners who you're working with. Are often overlooked. People are trying to jump to that really big program, the big initiative, the big massive restructure of an entire program or an entire offering. Overlooked are those opportunities to make small incremental changes that don't require quite as much upheaval. This is something I have stolen from an organization called Animating Democracy. When we are telling stories both internally and externally, they have a mantra of no stories without data and no data without stories. So find the ways to tell the stories about the impacts that you are having as you're making these small steps, about how you can connect the data to the real life stories of how your audiences, how your donors are engaging with your organization and the context of what's going on in your market and in your community. We have to move away from blockage, from negativism and powerlessness, right? Everyone at any role in the organization can have impact in some of these areas in small ways, right? There is a lot of negativism and powerlessness that we see in the organizations that we work with. And so we work to empower everyone from frontline staff at the box office to a chief exec to find ways to move past blockage and move into action. Bottom-up solutions, right? Yes, our leaders at the top are aware of this. There's none of this they haven't heard before, haven't been thinking about, I hope. But there are bottom-up solutions, and those are the ones that will drive culture and change within the organization. Lastly, share your ideas with team members. Share them across silos. Punch down those walls between marketing and development and box office and sales and programming. Find ways to be the one who is opening up and cracking through to share ideas, even these small little bottom up, small little actions that you can take to start to have impact on some of these metrics. Okay, Stephen, thank you. I see there's been lively chat going on throughout the presentation. I'm grateful that you were there to respond. Are there things bubbling up that you see that we should respond to? Yeah, tear it down. I agree, Rich.
See, the fan club is here. There are some great 15% solutions in here that are being tried and tested today. But I think a couple of questions that have cropped up, Brad, and I wonder if you might be able to give us a nugget on, is this reality around subscription units being down, revenue being slightly up. And what you're saying, I think, is that we see the future pipeline again for subscription. But what action can I take this season and next, facing that reality around what is still a decline in subscription units? We're managing the revenue, but that volume isn't back. What's my 15% solution there, would you recommend?
Yeah, the near term challenges on subscription are a real thing. I don't want to undermine it, right? It takes years in many cases to build not just a pipeline, but to build an individual subscriber. The one solution I would have is, as many of you are starting to think about, those of you who are on a kind of more traditional season format, you're probably in the time of year you're starting to think about programming and your pricing and your packaging, and you're getting ready for the coming season, right? For the 25-26 season. 24-25 is kind of already out there. Be really careful that you're not eroding your subscription value proposition to just try to maintain the revenues. What I have seen organizations do is, by playing with the amount of programming that they get, by playing with the discount rate that is in subscription packages, are tricks that they've been doing to try to maintain the value of a package, even though we've got fewer subscribers, trying to push the value up. But at the trade-off of that is that I'm seeing some erosion in the value proposition of a subscription as we reduce the discount rate, as we start to increase the prices that we're asking our subscribers to pay at an entry point. While that's helping us retain value and maintain that kind of 1% growth in revenue, it's setting the bar even higher to be able to drive new people in. So really needing to think about, how can you be creative about testing different mechanisms for allowing people to become a subscriber, to test drive a subscriber. Maybe that means playing with package size. Maybe that means experimenting with some pricing or some invitations to targeted segments. But it's trying to understand the flip side of all the good work that we've been doing to maintain the value in our subscription program, while we may have been accidentally making it harder for new people to find their way into it. What are the campaigns that you could put into place to naturally elevate people into subscriber status along the way? There's a client that we work with has had a great deal of success and has grown their subscription program overall on the back end of COVID. They've been doing really robust outbound calls to people who are spending a certain amount of money, whether they've come to one show or whether they've come to 3 shows. If their spend is reaching a certain level, it's triggering an outbound call, and a really attractive message to get people into a kind of all access pass approach to a subscription, or to upgrade them into a flexible subscription where we can apply their big investment from the first couple of shows that we've seen. We have to start thinking about these interventions to close the gap for people to become a subscriber, and not expect them to make the big leap all at once.
Thank you, Brad. There's a lot of comments and questions about pricing, and I'm just actually going to drop a link into a webinar that we did last year. Dynamic pricing is not enough. We've talked and jumped to price. We've talked a lot about price in here, but your strategy behind that. Also, we see more important than ever how you manage demand, and your perception of success is crucial to that retention and increase in recency and frequency. So if you so desire to sit through another hour with TRG, you can click that link and register, or you can also book time with Brad, and Brad will share a link after this session to talk further about specifically what might be going on in your organization, and we'll share that with you in our follow-up information. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Brad, for your time.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thank you.
You can expect to see more of us. Yes, Kimberly and all, we will share this recording, the slides with you via email very soon. Thank you for joining us. Very much appreciate it. And good luck to you all at your 15% solution. We can't wait to hear what you get up to.
Yeah, thank you all for doing the good work that you're doing in your communities. Hang in there. You got this.
Bye-bye.